cannot recreate a country by putting a different culture into it. You don't get Australia out of Islam, or India, or China.
Connor Tomlinson, good to meet you.
Good to meet you, sir.
Welcome to Australia.
Yeah, I know, first time.
Yeah.
Wonderful hotel, awful flight.
Yeah, I don't envy that, but look, I wanted to ask you a few questions. So you've done a lot of content in the recent past week on Charlie Kirk and the fallout for that. I think you've used the term, was it Radio Rwanda, to describe some of the outlets that are the Democratic Party outlets, affiliated media in the US. And obviously there's been a lot of celebration of Charlie's death online. Do you believe that there is still a sort of moderate left or moderates that can be won over? Because I see a lot of discourse about how the left, or part of the left, is irredeemable. You can't negotiate with these people. So what is the path forward? Is there a path forward with civil dialogue, or is it, are we sort of out of that option?
I think there are three categories. There's people who believe what Charlie Kirk believed, that would be me, so Christian conservatives who want to rejuvenate their civilizations, who think that the battery acid of liberalism, multiculturalism and the like being poured on it is anathema to having a thriving and flourishing civilization. Category two, there are people who are like default libs, right? I'd put my wife when I met her in this box. I'll be sleeping on the sofa when I get home but when I say this, but it's people who have not strong ideological convictions, but think of themselves as compassionate and on the left, but who are fundamentally committed to resolving things through civil dialogue. Now that group exists, but it is shrinking. And it's because of the top-down pressure placed on it by politicians, members of the press, Twitch streamers, TikTokers, academia, media, you take your pick. This is the third category, the category of people who have not only participated in political violence, but championed it and celebrated it. Before Charlie Kirk was even dead, when we were still hoping he might pull through in an hour, people took to cable news and TikTok and celebrated it and said he got what he deserved. You had AOC standing up in Congress yesterday saying that Charlie Kirk's views were ignorant, to insinuate that he deserved to be shot because he said things that she didn't like. Presumably every single other person who voted for President Trump and enjoyed Charlie Kirk's clips online or attended his events deserve the same fate too. You cannot share a country with people that fundamentally want you dead for having conversations that you don't like. Now, does this mean you respond with political violence in kind? No, especially because in our country, the government is always looking for an excuse to crack down on you for tweets, let alone taking to the streets and endorsing in extrajudicial violence. So don't do that. What instead needs to be done to prevent that future from happening is for the Trump administration to use its monopoly on force to crack down on things like the Soros Open Society Foundation, this NGO industrial complex that foments violence and acts like the Democrats' Radio Rwanda, preaching anti-white hatred and anti-Christian bigotry constantly. They need to designate, they already have a designated Antifa, a domestic terror organization. It needs to be international, because there are cells throughout Europe, Germany, Sweden, the UK, etc., which dox individuals and put a bounty on their head. They need to, as they've already snipped the USAID, snip the purse strings of all the other leftist funding NGOs. They need to designate Black Lives Matter, a domestic terror organization as well. A day before Charlie was killed, they were saying black people have a right to violence on Instagram. Unacceptable. You shouldn't be killing people because of their race and their politics. And they need to ensure that Democrat cable news cannot continue to call people fascists, Nazis, racists and Confederates, which is inciting violence against them. Because if you are at the nadir, the lowest point of the post-war moral order, this mythology that our Western nations, now that they're liberal and democratic apparently, tell themselves, if you constantly say, this person is the second coming of Hitler, and heroes killed Hitler, that means that you are saying you will be a hero if you kill this person. That's why they shot Trump, that's why they killed Charlie Kirk, and that's why, if nothing is done, the rest of us will be next.
And on British politics, a lot of people in Australia will just see some of the headlines, like the recent Unite the Kingdom rally. They might see the migrant hotel protests every now and then, but it's not a daily feature of our news cycle. What would your summary be for people for the uninitiated, about what the current state of British politics is?
Since 1974, in every election and referendum, we voted against mass migration and got more. So it's not just mass illegal migration, about 50,000 boat crossers and people who smuggle themselves on lorries from Calais every year. It's over 1 million legal migrants too. And that's as much of a problem. And so this is why people have taken to the streets and done the Raise the Colours campaign, putting the Union Jack and specifically the English flag up everywhere to say, Britain belongs to British people. the native, indigenous, cultural majority who still exist in this country. And they have a right to wave their own flag in their country. And if in your country your flag is a symbol of protest, that shows you how bad things really are. The Labour government are currently throwing 12,000 people a year in prison for social media posts. People are sick to death of the stifling climate of censorship, the betrayal by the political class of many parties, both Conservatives and Labour alike, and the fact that they feel that nothing works. So the infrastructure is crumbling, taxes are far too high, we've got millionaires fleeing in their droves, even more than communist China. We are a country that's somewhere between an ISIS caliphate and North Korea. It's not very nice. And so this is why people have turned out in up to 1 million, by the bird's eye view things, at the mostly peaceful Unite the Kingdom rally last week. There seemed to be more people that were arrested on the stand up to racism, socialist, worker, communist side of things than there were on the British Patriot side. That's an encouraging sign. They can't just write us all as far right for once. There are people that are deciding to break ranks from the political unit party and vote for Reform UK. They've been wobbly on certain topics. It took a year to drag Nigel Farage kicking and screaming to the position of mass deportations, which is what I said at his conference last year, but I'm glad, always glad when converts come to the position eventually, and we hope that they live up to their mandate, because they're riding high in the polls. They're at 35%. It looks like they're going to win an outright majority in government, barring any political unforeseen circumstances, as we saw in America. You know, just in the last week, these things can happen, but God willing, nothing does. What they need to do is copy Trump's revolution. They don't need to be Trump term 1, chaos, unreliable personnel, no plan on day 1. They need to be Trump term 2. They need to have a Project 2029. They need to have all the people that they're going to appoint when they fire and rehire the civil service. They need competent politicians, rather than just taking all of yesterday's Tories in, like taking reform into a refugee camp. Can't be done. They will betray you. And so there is certainly a popular mandate for reducing migration to the point where we have net emigration, for mass deportations of all illegal immigrants, all their families, all the foreign criminals clogging up our prisons, to cut our taxes and to remove the yoke of censorship and human rights laws compliance that puts British citizens back at the queue in their own country. And so it's encouraging that there are these grassroots political movements, that there are these insurgent upstart political parties. Hopefully all of this energy strikes a lightning rod come 2029. Because otherwise, with the demographic situation we have, Britain is going to become minority British by 2063. Mohammed is already the #1 baby name in England. We don't have 10 years to prat about and sort this out. It has to be within the next 5, and we need radical, revolutionary change to restore our country.
Just on the indigeneity as a sort of argument for preserving the British or English ethnic group as the dominant one in England. Obviously, we're in Australia, and the Anglo-Celtic people are not the indigenous group here. I'm just wondering, you're scheduled to speak later today. I mean, I was going to ask you about that. How does that argument about indigeneity sort of graft onto Australia?
You don't get Australia without Australians. You don't get Australia from India or China. And so Australia is not a nation of immigrants, it's a nation of settlers. The hardiest people from England decided to get on an awful boat. I barely even made the flight, right? I wouldn't have been able to get on that 200-300 years ago. Go over to Australia and turn a barren outback into a frontier with beautiful cities like Brisbane or clean beaches like Bondi, right? Bondi. And so you do not get Australia out of anyone else except the named historical characters, the families, the people who settled this land and built it up as it is. And so, yes, Australian people, as in the Anglo-Celts and the Aborigines as well, that have, melded themselves into those families, they are indigenous to Australia as a nation.
So it's more about who makes up the character of the nation and society rather than the physical location per se.
Yes, and because cultural change is downstream of demographic change. So cultures belong to peoples. This is why Australian values, Australian culture has the prefix Australian, because you're identifying distinct people who invented that culture, who are the custodians of it, and who feel it most closely in their hearts. And so if you replace the people, you replace the culture, and you replace the nation. So you can't pretend that every single immigrant is equal. There are a handful of people that will come over, that will join a national family, that will contribute positively, yes, economically, but countries aren't economic zones. Culturally, they will belong to our national tribe. But the rest, who live apart from us, who are purely mercantile in their way of doing things, who do not hold the sentiments and the culture as deeply in their hearts as heritage Australians, well, I'm sorry, but they just aren't welcome. They won't continue your civilization. And I say this as someone who has Australian family members, but if I moved over here, I would still be a Brit. I would only ever be a paper Australian, and I would be here as a guest in your country, at the expense of the homeowners. And so if guests are impolite, if they do not want to defer to the homeowners, then they are squatters and they must be removed.
Final question. So from looking at your LinkedIn, you've written a bunch of publications over the years. You've been involved in the Conservative Party at one stage, I believe, before you got kicked out.
Yeah, that's about right, yeah.
So, I mean, what would your advice be for young people who are interested in politics, who want to sort of, their career goal is to end up as an emerging commentator such as yourself?
Be too big of a problem to ignore. Don't try and look for acceptance by people who have led the Conservative or the Liberal Party into the electoral ditch. Don't try and knock on the closed door of the Australian Broadcasting Company or something like that. Get together, build institutions, ensure that you are a credible voice on one given issue, and attention should just accrue over time. Lots of people want to seek fame for fame's sake. Instead, just be a warrior and a crusader on one particular problem that you want to fix, and that you would actually be happy for your career to evaporate if that problem was solved, and then people will hopefully start listening to you. And I can see there's a bunch of young Australians doing this. I know a few of them. I don't want to name and shame them in case that I out them, but hope truly lies with our generation, because I've met some older Australian politicians, and they're nice people, but I don't think they get what time it is. They still think that they're existing in the 80s or the early 2000s, where the honourable opposition just disagrees with the marginal tax rates. No. They want to fundamentally terraform, revolutionise your civilization until it is unrecognisable. And so, much like Charlie Kirk recognised, despite himself being a moderate who wanted conversations, these people don't want to debate with you. Lots of them just want you dead. And unfortunately, you might well be able to win over all those people that do want to debate with you, but there is a contingent that you cannot persuade, and so you just must act in purely defensive posture and go to political war against these people. And when you have state power, use it to ensure that they cannot take power and cannot destroy your country ever again. And I think there's a lot of awareness that is what the time is among our generation, and all they need to do is get together, organise, and make their voices heard.
Connor Tomlinson, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure, sir.